The forms I provide aren't going to do any good if you don't already have someone who knows how this business works. If you've got that operations person, then go get your lawyer, right? And then that lawyer can work with that operations person to set up as bulletproof as you can get, a compliance and risk mitigation structure that will enable that business owner to flourish.
Welcome to Behind the Screens, conversations with background screening pros. I'm Les Rosen, your host, and I'm excited to have you here. On this podcast, we chat with the people who know the background screening world inside and out. Executives, industry experts, legal pros, and more. We dive into their personal stories and insights to give you a real look at what's happening behind the scenes. Whether you work in the screening industry or are just curious, Behind the Screens bring you the real, unfiltered conversations from the people who make it all happen. Stick around for stories you won't hear anywhere else. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Behind the Screens, discussions with background screening pros, sponsored by our good friends at the Pre-Employment Directory, Barry Nixon. And welcome to this special episode featuring a very talented attorney. We have today is Lawyer Day at Behind the Screens. It's a lawyer you're going to recognize. He's a former member of the board of PBSA. He is a speaker quite often, has some amazing topics, and you'll know him as soon as I say Todd Higey. Todd, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Les. It's a pleasure and a delight to join you. I have really appreciated your podcasts and getting to know people I already know even better. So it's wonderful to have my opportunity to join you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. We're going to find out more about you than people probably know, and maybe more than you want them to know, but we'll see how it goes. All right. So it looks like you're in a law office. Where are you talking to us from today?
Yes, sir. I am in the fair city of Birmingham, Alabama. As you mentioned, this is my law office. It's really kind of neat. This building that I'm in is over 100 years old, and it just feels like what you think of when you think of a solo law office. And so I've been here now for 3 years, and I love coming to work here.
So the building, I think I'm older than that building. At least some days I feel like it. But all right. So that brings us to our first question. What are you doing these days? So you obviously are practicing law, but what's your current role? What do you do? What do you find interesting about it?
Yeah. So as you may know, and as some of the listeners may know, I served a stint as an in-house lawyer for a background screening company. We went through a couple of transactions. And 3 years ago, the portfolio of companies I was serving as general counsel sold. And, the question was at that point, what next? When you're in-house counsel, of course, you're a cost center, you're shared services like your chief financial officer, right? And so when another company comes in to acquire you, often legal and finance, we don't need two lawyers, we don't need two CFOs. And I was on the acquired side. And so along with the chief financial officer, we were, at a point where now it was time for us to figure out what we wanted to do next. And, so the question then, this was about 3 years ago, the question was, okay, so do I look for another in-house gig here in the industry? I certainly knew of a lot of the companies in the space. Or do I go join one of the law firms that we all know very well, reach out to those lawyers and talk about that? And, as I was debating what to do, my wife said to me, honey, you have always talked about having your own law firm. So, I've been practicing law now for 28 years. And I started out as a private practice lawyer with an old law firm here in Birmingham and did a lot of litigation work for a decade and a half before I got into the background screening industry. And my wife said, you've really been wanting to do that. The kids are grown, they're out of the house. Now seems like a good time to try it. And I was like, I wasn't thinking I'd do it this soon, but I think you're right. And so I hung up a shingle, and God's blessed. I've got, wonderful clients, plenty of business, and I'm having a lot of fun. And so I have the wonderful people that I've met over the years in the background screening space have supported me. And so a good bit of my business is continuing to represent background screening companies and wholesalers and data brokers, and it ranges from the transactional work to the compliance work to even a little bit of litigation work. And so I'm just having a lot of fun, Les. And this is I call it my third phase of my law practice. And maybe I'll ride this one into the sunset.
So you have your CRA background screening related work, and then you have your bread and butter solo practitioner work, just the sort of things that come through the door that you want to take. So, well, that's a lot of fun. You have no boss. All right.
Or a lot of bosses, depending on how you want to look at it.
Now, your path, you sort of mentioned, obviously, you're in-house, and now you're out-house. I don't know, that term never seemed exactly right. You're an out-house lawyer, but...
I use it.
All right. So, well, what was your path from where you started to where you are now? What happened along the way?
So as I mentioned, way back when I was a baby lawyer in the late 90s, see, I'm not even originally from Birmingham. What happened is I married a girl, a lovely redhead from Birmingham. And these ladies here, they love to stay close to home. And she and her mother actually, I say, conspired to find me a job here in Birmingham. It was with a wonderful law firm. I learned how to practice law under lawyers that had been doing it for decades. They were really top quality people. And it was just great training. And so I practiced law there and did a lot of different litigation work. I mean, I did railroad work, real property litigation, telephone companies, banks, toxic tort litigation, just kind of a broad spectrum. And it was just great learning experience. You just got to see a lot of different things. I mean, I've been down, miles underground in coal mines, in connection with, personal injury defense cases. I've been in steel mills. I've been out on railroad yards. It's just stuff that you would never think you would ever do. But being a lawyer like that gives you opportunities to see things like that. So, that went on for about 15 or 16 years. And then I got to a point where, I'd like to try my hand at being an in-house lawyer and see what that's like, right? And this is a classic Birmingham story. Birmingham's a big, small town is what it is. And so this is how I wound up going to work for ESS here in Birmingham as a woman-founded business. Sheila Benson was the lady that founded ESS. And, they had been involved in PBSA for a long time. But anyway, follow me here, Sheila's husband was the chief financial officer for another private family-owned Birmingham company whose general counsel was the first lawyer that I learned under way back in the late 90s. And so when Sheila was looking for her first lawyer, Birmingham, we like to find people we know or people who know people that we know.
Right.
And we got connected together. It was like within a week, right? I met with Sheila and her son, Jason, and they brought me on board. And, the rest is history, so to speak, in terms of my introduction to background screening and consumer reporting and Fair Credit Reporting Act. Because I could tell you, before I joined Sheila, I was like, fair credit, what? I mean, I never even heard the law. But, a litigator is a jack of all trades, master of none. And we just learn a lot of different things, right? And a lot of different subject matters. And so this is just another one. But being in-house, of course, we were, medium size at that point, but still small enough that I had I was given responsibility for an operations team, right? So I'm doing more than just being a lawyer, right? I'm like supervising people that are actually doing the Q work, even doing the Q work myself sometimes. And so I really got to see how you do background screening, right? From cradle to grave, from the sales process and meeting with clients. And, Vince, on one of your other podcasts, mentioned going on RFPs. I remember going on RFPs and calling on people and being part of that sales team, and it, and I know the other in-house lawyers in our space, they have that similar experience. You just really get to know the business in a way that you're never going to learn unless you're in it. And so I got to do that and really got to know the business that way. And of course, as we see with a lot of these companies, eventually Sheila sold to another portfolio. and worked with them and had stewardship of those companies for a couple of years. And then we sold again. And then it was at that point that I'm like, I've had fun being in-house, made a lot of friends. I like the industry, don't want to get out of the industry, but I'm ready to go back to private practice.
Exactly.
So here we are.
So that's really interesting. So, I mean, the advantage is seeing how the sausage is made and getting your hands dirty and actually making the sausage, right? Right.
Yeah.
Actually producing the product,
And you get a level of respect for what these people have to do. I mean, all day long, they're working in this queue. They're looking at county criminal records and having to, evaluate the data. They need to do it in a timely fashion, but be accurate at the same time. And yeah, you kind of gain a respect for what it's like to do that. I certainly did. I did not envy them and was happy to be the lawyer.
All right. So that's a great background, particularly the hard part about you're right, jack of all trades. You become an expert momentarily in whatever case you're working on, right?
Yeah.
And then a new case comes on, and you're an expert in something new. All right. So,
Yep.
Exactly. So in this career path, are there any mentors you want to call out or influencers in your career that you want to do a call out for and give a little bit of credit?
Definitely. So I would call out 3 people, and these are the founders and owners and the CEOs of the businesses I worked for. Sheila Benson, Kevin Smith, he's not in the industry anymore, and Brandon Phillips, he is still in our industry. Brandon was the founder of Global HR Research. Sheila was the founder of Employment Screening Services, and Kevin worked for the private equity company that had the portfolio of VSS and Global HR and
Right.
several other background screening companies. And the reason why I call them out is, Les, and you might be able to appreciate this. When you go to law school, you're not taught anything about business. And when you're a partner in a law firm, like I was for a number of years, I mean, you advise businesses, but it's not the same thing as actually learning how to build and grow a business. And you probably experienced that yourself when you went from being a lawyer to a business person. And so I got to learn under Sheila, Kevin, and Brandon what it means to build a business, right? And how you look at it and how you go about doing it. And the reason why I really appreciate that is this third phase of my law practice where I've got my own outfit. I don't know that I would have had the skill set that I needed to do it successfully without having spent time with them watching how they built and ran a business. And so it was wonderful because it enabled me to do something that perhaps I might have not been able to have done, at least not with the success that I'm experiencing.
Oh, that's great. I mean, on that point, it's a personal story. I remember I had retired as a lawyer, and I said, "Well, I'll start a background firm." And my CPA looked at me and said, "Are you crazy? You're a lawyer. You don't know one thing about running a business." Right? I said, "Well, it can't be that hard." Right? And it turned out, yeah, it was that hard. Right.
Yeah. Yes.
That's great. So in the time that you spent, in the business world, and we'll get to this in a little bit, in the CRA world and PBSA and that involvement, are there any lessons that you learned early in your career that stuck with you and come to the mind, and quickly bubble to the surface that you'd want to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to what I just said, and it's not necessarily a background screening lesson, but it's this lesson that to grow a company, you got to really invest money. I mean, you got to take the money, you got to invest it to build up a business, and you got to expect that, you're going to take a risk and invest that capital in the hopes and trust that it will bear fruit down the road, right? And so that understanding that, learning that, and seeing that was a good experience for me. And so that's kind of, out of all of that time that I spent, is about 9 years, right, in-house. It was those business lessons that I really took away, at least on a personal level. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. What were a couple of the business lessons that come to mind?
Yeah. So one that comes to mind is the importance of transparency with your customers, right? A lot of times the customers in our space don't understand what they're buying when it comes to background screening. They often don't understand the complexity that's involved in putting together a background check report. And so I found over the years, because I, wound up having a lot of interaction with clients, sometimes when things, didn't work out, at least from the client's perspective, as expected, I discovered that it was really helpful to be open and transparent with them in the contracts, in the product descriptions, in the onboarding materials, laying out for them, this is how it works. This is what you can reasonably expect. This is what you shouldn't expect, because there are limitations involved in what we do. And also sometimes having some very candid discussions with, hey, I understand budget is an issue for you, client, employer, and so you may choose the more economical package, but you need to realize it's the more economical package, right? And so having those discussions, it was helpful because then down the road, issues were prevented or more easily addressed because you had already developed those relationships with your customers.
And that's a great lesson, managing expectations. So the client knows exactly what the boundaries are, what they're getting, what they're not getting, so they're not oversold. And then to, ultimately it's their decision as to, how much they want to spend on due diligence. But boy, it's valuable to point out to them, you get what you pay for. So
Yeah.
that's great.
Usually what happens is a record is allegedly missed and, they immediately want to, hey, what did you do wrong? It's like, well, we didn't do anything wrong. You didn't actually buy the federal criminal search, for example, and this was a federal crime, or something like that, right? But you got to say it diplomatically, right? Because you'd like to preserve that client relationship, but at the same time, got to be, straightforward with them. So yeah, it was just that to me, and it tended to influence how I did contracting. My contract over the years evolved and grew in part because you have these experiences with clients and like, okay, let me go back and, beef up that section or add that clause. It's not necessarily meant directly for any sort of risk mitigation, although there's that component in there, but it's meant more to communicate to the client.
Right. Yeah.
And I had a lot of negotiations with clients, where the other side would say, I appreciate you explaining that to me. I understand what's going on now, and I understand why that's in there, and that's helpful for us to understand.
Oh, that's good.
And so that was always a good thing to learn and watch happen with, on the business side.
Interesting. Well, let's pivot a little bit to a little broader question. So you had, I guess, if my math is right, 15 years or so of where you're sort of a jack of all trades. You specialized in whatever the client was paying you to do. that type of specialization. It's like when I started law, I tell people I specialized in legal problems of rich people. I was my first firm, right? But you came to the background industry, and obviously you got totally involved. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. And you're still involved. So what is it about the background screening industry that you find passionate about, or that you find interesting that has kept your attention there?
Yeah. So, of course, I echo what a lot of your prior guests have said. The relationships are amazing, and I didn't expect that, right? When I first, started at ESS and I was learning the industry, obviously I need to go to the PBSA conferences, right, to learn and to, connect with other lawyers and other business people. And without necessarily expecting that I would also develop these wonderful friendships. So I certainly echo what your prior guests have said about that. Less for me, and this is just me and how I'm hardwired. Practicing law is a craft. I like that term better than art form. I mean, there's a component to it that is an art form, but it's really a craft where you learn, after many years how to do it. And what I enjoy is the fact that I am a subject matter expert in the business, in the industry, and I'm privileged to have people ask me to help them serve as their lawyer, right? So that's what I get joy in, is doing that complex commercial negotiation with a client where you get to a successful resolution and the parties strike a deal. Or perhaps it's a piece of litigation and I'm representing the client and I am, blessed to obtain a successful outcome, right, in that litigation for that client. That's what I live for. That's what I enjoy. One of the reasons I went back to private practice is, the bigger a company gets when you're a lawyer, the less you practice law,
Right.
and the more you're just an administrative and business person. And there's a place for that, and you need lawyers in the general counsel role of the big companies. I wanted to get back to the craft, right? Practicing law. And that's what I love, that I can do it in something that I know very well.
Oh, that's great. So the context of practicing law and being in-house and now having your own practice, is there a particular proud moment you look back at, or an accomplishment or achievement that really stands out in your mind and brings a smile to your face? And yeah, that was a good one. I really liked that one.
So when you go in-house, right, obviously one of the reasons your chief executive officer brings you in-house is, and I'm sure all of us in-house lawyers got this directive, make sure I don't get sued, right? I'm paying you a salary, and I want you to make sure I don't get sued, and so you go about the task of developing and implementing compliance protections and risk mitigation measures, right? And you figure out, okay, well, let me try this and let me implement this. But a lot of time it feels like proving a negative, right? Because, okay, how do I know this is working, right? How do I know all this that I've set up, this infrastructure, these procedures, these forms that I may have introduced, how do I know that that's actually going to work? And I had that tested. And there was a day when I was in-house, when the class action lawsuit rolled in the door from a big national plaintiffs law firm. As I was reading, of course, at first your heart just stops, and then drops into your stomach because it's class action complaint, right? Like, I don't want to walk down the hallway and tell my CEO, we just got served with a class action lawsuit, right? I mean, so you open up the complaint and you start reading, right? What's the allegation? And as I'm reading it, I'm like, wait a minute, I did what he said I didn't do in terms of compliance with the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And I'm going through it. I'm like, no, I did all this, and I've got the evidence for it. So when I got done reading the complaint, went down to my CEO and I said, okay, take a deep breath.
Bad news, good news.
Lawsuit rolled in the door, but we didn't do what he said we did. In fact, we complied with the law, and I got the evidence to prove it. So let me see if I can take care of this. So then I go back. I reached out to my outside counsel and I said, hey, look, I just need you on standby, but I want to reach out to this plaintiff's lawyer directly. And so I gathered my evidence. I reached out to the plaintiff's lawyer and I handed him my evidence. I said, look, you said I didn't do this, this, and this. Here's my evidence to prove I did this, this, and this. And maybe it was just a lucky day for me. Maybe it was the lawyer that I drew for the luck of the draw. But he looked it all over and we got on the phone and he said, Todd, I got other fish to fry. Looks like you've got your house in order. He voluntarily dismissed that class action lawsuit. I didn't have to pay a single penny or even file an appearance. And that was my victory moment. That was where all those years of building that stuff up paid off. And that was my highlight, right? Like it worked. And so, yeah, I'm particularly proud of that moment.
Oh, congratulations. So you had dotted every I, crossed every T, and most importantly, it's all documented.
Yes.
That old saying where you say, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. So it's all
right.
Documented and justice prevailed.
That's right. That's right. So I got the case dismissed, didn't pay a penny, and didn't even have to have a defense lawyer appear for me. And so, yeah, that was a highlight, Les. That was a highlight.
Well, congratulations. That's one of those great moments where, God, it worked.
Yes.
Everything worked. So let's look at PBSA now. I alluded to the fact that you were on the board, that you've given a number of presentations. You have presentations coming up, I'm sure. Well, let's start anywhere you want. How has PBSA influenced your career? Describe your participation. What do you think? Sure.
So PBSA has been a delightful surprise. Did not expect it to turn out the way it did. And I don't know that I would have this private solo law practice, but for the good people at the PBSA and the relationships I was fortunate to be able to develop. So first off, I'm just glad and excited to be part of it. One of the things I did early on was join the government relations team, and I've been involved and now not an official co-chair. I'm just kind of a permanent member of the managing committee for the GR team. And that's always been a passion of mine. The opportunity to go to DC and speak with our representatives and our senators. There is probably no better way to effectuate change for the good of the industry than working with our representatives on good legislation or opposing bad legislation. So, and through that vehicle, I just got to know a lot of people. That's probably what led to the introduction and invitation to sit for the board. It was wonderful being on the board. It happened during COVID. So like that's when we had our virtual meetings. So, I didn't get to have the full board experience that maybe a board member gets with all the in-person meetings and working sessions, but nonetheless got to develop some great relationships, see how the association works, learn about the history of the association. And so it was a lot of fun being on the board and getting to know, the folks there. And, what was fun about being in-house, Les, is, when I was in-house, I didn't, conferences were just fun, right? You go, you attend, you hang out with your friends, you learn a lot. Now that I'm an outhouse lawyer, I'll say it, I'm an outhouse lawyer. Of course, I need to go and do my fair share and present, help the good folks at the industry, on a variety of subjects. But lots of fun. I enjoy going every time I go to a conference. I enjoy going.
I should add that every PBSA committee does really important work, and every thing that someone does to volunteer, but in my observation is that being on government relations is a particularly hard time bandit job because there's just so much happening. And when I used to listen to the meetings in the early years, even then before there was so much happening, like, oh my God, there's so much coming down the pipe in terms of cases and legislation. And most legislation doesn't get passed, but you don't know. You guys still have to be on top of everything that's introduced. And then being on the board is, such a commitment time-wise, right? I mean, it's the amount of meetings, the amount of stuff that's. I don't think that members who are not involved at that level quite appreciate that or appreciate what people do.
Well, you get out what you put in, right? And if you're not part of the team and contributing to the team, there's just a lot you're not going to, enjoy and benefit from. So it's a wonderful symbiotic relationship, I think, for most of us in the space that are plugged in. I think we receive as much as we give, and that's just the way the world works. And so I'm happy to be part of the effort.
Well, you've also presented quite a bit. What were some of the things or some of the topics you've presented on?
So, and this one goes back to when I was in-house, when my CEO said, make sure I don't get sued, and I'm sitting here figuring out, okay, what do I need to do to make sure we don't get sued? And how do I figure out what I need to be concerned about, right? Because like when you're in-house, you got to rank your priorities, right? You can't solve everything on day one. And some issues require more resources, whether it's people or money, that may or may not be available. After all, we've got a business to run, right? And so there are legitimate competing demands for resources in a company. And as I mentioned, when you're in-house, you're a cost center, right? Right. You're not bringing in the revenue. As a matter of fact, salespeople used to call me sales prevention because they felt like I'm like, look, I'm not sales prevention. I'm just trying to keep the money from going out the back door after you bring it in the front door. That's all I'm trying to do. And so I had to figure out, what do I need to be worried about? And what do I need to be aware of, but perhaps I don't need to worry about today or even this month, right? I had to figure out how to prioritize my concerns. And, the only way I could think of at the time was, what? I need to put some little tickler alerts in place where I'm tracking all the lawsuits that get filed in federal court through PACER, right? And what that does is it kind of gives me a sense of, okay, this is an issue that I've seen a half dozen lawsuits or a dozen lawsuits in the last few months. So obviously the plaintiff's lawyers are focused on it. They're obviously trying to drive an issue. And so maybe that's something that I need to focus on. internally, right? But on the other hand, there may be like this one-off suit, and you look at it and you're like, okay, I see what's going on there. I see how that might have happened. I see how I might have that same exposure, but if I do these 2 or 3 low effort action items, I can probably reduce my risk profile there and then not have to, worry about that for today. And so what I started doing was just tracking this data year over year over year. So I got a sense as to what was theory of the day in the plaintiff's bar. What were they focusing on? What was kind of a one-off? And so, once I went back out to private practice, I decided I would start sharing that data, in an annual presentation, very data driven. So when I was in-house and even now as an outside lawyer, I really want my decisions to be data driven, right? What you got to be careful of is not letting the anecdote, the single really bad case, drive everything else you do.
Right.
Because yes, the bad thing happened. And yes, it was a bad outcome for that, competitor in your space. But, it may be the case that you shouldn't let it drive some of your other decision making, right? So I wanted data-driven decision making. And so I spent a lot of time tracking that data. And so, yes, every year, during the annual session, I'll kind of do a last 12 months, but it's not just the last 12 months because I'm benchmarking against prior years.
Right.
So you can see, is this a trend? Is this a trend that's maybe going down? And so it kind of gives you a big picture view. And so I love doing that. And it continues to help me even in private practice because I'm getting a sense as to, I can reach out to clients and say, hey, I really think this is an issue where you need to spend some time on this. We need to do some changes to your procedures and your operations, maybe even your fulfillment processes, because look, someone else, I'm seeing this trend and others are dealing with it. Let's try and fix it for you before it becomes an issue for you.
I mean, that's just brilliant. I mean, you just see who's being sued for what. And it's not just what the plaintiff's bar, what their theories are, is that if they uncover a deficiency and they file a lawsuit because some CRA just plain didn't do something that they, reasonably could or should have done, you pick that up too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you help build a compliance wall.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Oh, that's great. And we actually did a session together. I can't remember what year now, but we did a mock trial. That's right.
That's right.
And I still have to thank you guys. I think you actually wrote the final script and what was the expression? Had the rode the pulling oar or whatever. I mean, you are. So I still appreciate that.
That was the old litigator in me. Of course, now I'm back in litigation, right? I just couldn't stay away from it, right? And it was kind of funny. When I went in-house, the CFO I told you, who was kind of the connection that brought me into ESS, he was like, are you sure you can give up trying cases and, being a litigator? And I'm like, I think I can, but, apparently I couldn't, after 10
Right.
years, I'm back at it again. So
you find yourself back in court now or some,
yes, sir.
some of the
Yes,
cases?
sir.
Are...
I've got multiple cases. I got cases in the industry and I got cases outside that, just what I call my local Alabama work. I'm trying cases, going to court, arguing motions. So, yep, back in it again.
You're a full-blown lawyer then. You're out there in front of judges and juries and fighting it out. All right.
In the trenches, the way, and I will say it was a big benefit having that litigation experience before I went in-house because there's a lot of talk about, and it's not inappropriate, but there's a lot of talk about the crossing the T's and dotting the I's. But then there's kind of like the reality of the chaos of litigation, right? And the way things play out in litigation is often a lot different that you might expect when you are just kind of doing the structured compliance. And so it's helpful to understand how things actually play out. A lot of times it has less to do with actual liabilities and more to do with the dynamics of the players involved, the jurisdiction that you're in, the insurance policy that is or is not in place, right? I mean, this, Les. And so, that sort of tempers a little bit how you approach compliance when you understand how things actually play out.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, in my previous life, I tried, I don't know, 250 jury trials, more than that. And a lot of them were 6, 8, 9, 10 months long. And yeah, so I love that expression, sort of the chaos of litigation. I mean, you never know. And what a jury's thinking, what a witness is thinking, what might happen.
No.
Yeah, exactly. Well, listen, let's pivot now and away from the background screening industry and PBSA and all the things we've been talking about. Todd, let's talk about what you do when you're not involved in background screening. What do you do in Birmingham outside of screening for fun and hobbies and things like that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so my kids are grown. My youngest is 22 and the oldest is 27. My lovely bride has been married to her for over 30 years, and we love to camp.
Oh,
The other thing I love to do is I'm an avid cyclist, and I went through a phase, I don't know, 12 years or so ago, where I was racing competitively mountain biking, right? So that means we're going all over the Southeast to various state parks and national parks and doing mountain bike races. And my wife always had wanted to go camping, right? She loves to camp. And she finally persuaded me to buy a little pop-up camper, right? And I hitch it up to the Jeep, and we would go around, and I'd do some mountain bike racing. We'd have the campsite set up. And so one of our favorite places is the Smoky Mountains, right? I mean, it's a 4-hour drive from Birmingham, and we can be up in the mountains and enjoy that. So, that is what we love to do, to decompress and to, recharge.
oh, that's great. Well, that's a great drive because it's on, a little bit further on, or not a little bit, that's sort of on the way to Atlanta for you, right?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we typically we just head northeast through Chattanooga, and we're right into up by Knoxville and then right up into the Smoky Mountains. It's wonderful.
I love it. The Chattanooga is a great little town. I actually went and saw what someone said was a Chattanooga choo-choo. I have no idea. And had some great food. And took that trip from either Nashville or Memphis through Chattanooga, over the Smoky into Atlanta, and then back again for another conference. So that's great. So when you go camping, is it camper camping or sleeping on the ground in a tent camping, or what do you guys do?
So we don't have one of those big RVs or, one of those ones you drive. This is the old school pop-up, right? So we're not on the ground, but it's not super glamorous. It's just kind of a traditional, because I'm not I really didn't want to be driving a big RV or one of those big, that's just not me, right? Like I got a Jeep Grand Cherokee, it's 7 years old, and I just wanted something I could tow around and, we could set up. It's just my wife and I, and of course she brings her little dachshunds. And so it's not tent camping, but it's not luxury camping. It's just kind of a sweet spot.
Oh, that's great. And what type of mountain bike do you have? I live in Marin County. We're the mountain biking capital of the world, I'm told. And I used to mountain bike.
Mine was built in Chattanooga. It's made by a company called Linsky. And Linsky is an old family that has been building titanium frames in the Chattanooga area for a couple of decades. And so I've supported a local manufacturer. And so it's a hardtail Linsky mountain bike.
Okay. Well, you heard it here. Todd Higey, mountain biker. All right. All right. Yeah, I don't mind the going down part as long as it's not too fast. You don't want to do an endo. You don't want to go end over end, but it's the uphill part that gets me.
Yep. Yeah, you guys, and it's different out there. Down here in the Southeast, it's all gnarly, single track, very tight, twisty, rooty, rocky.
Yeah. You hit a route wrong and you're going a little too fast. It's like, not one of your better days. All right. So that's fantastic. I had no idea that you were an outdoorsman, camper, mountain biker. So tell us, what's a fun fact about you that people may not know or suspect? And of course, once you reveal it, the cat's out of the bag. So people will tease you unmercifully about it at the future conferences. So now you can tell me.
So Les, not everybody has a fun fact about them, right? I mean, some of us are just quiet, boring people that don't have fun facts. And so like last night, when I told my wife I was doing this podcast, I was like, Les is going to ask me for my fun fact. And I'm like, honey, I can't think of a fun fact about me. And she started, she's like, well, what about back in college? I'm like, no, we're not going to college days for fun facts. It's off limits. It's got to be something, when I was an adult, so to speak. So I don't know if this is a fun fact, but it's a an interesting fact. It's a statistic because I like statistics and data. So there's a company years ago in California that developed this app called Strava, Strava. And Strava is this app that cyclists use, and it records your bike ride, right? And when you're done with your ride and you've ridden with your buddies, right, it kind of all uploads into this social platform. Everyone can see what everyone else did, how fast you were. Were you faster than your buddy? Were you slower than your buddy? Who did this segment? Is that, just classic, guys wanting to know who's faster and who's, better, right? Just kind of classic competitiveness. But it's a fun app, but it tracks your data. So I was looking at that data the other day, and now keep in mind, I've been a cyclist for 38 years, but Strava's only been around for about 15 years. So the data set I have only goes back to 2012. But since 2012, I have ridden 64,686 miles on my bike with an elevation gain of 4.1 million feet.
Holy moly. So, matching that data, what's that roughly off the top of my head? It's at least 2.5 times around the world. and I was trying to really quickly trying to figure out how many times you biked up Mount Everest, but I would need my calculator for that.
Oh yeah, I've never even thought about that. I guess you have to divide it by 29,028 feet. But yeah, so I love cycling. It's just the way that I stay healthy, stay sane. And it's kind of like practicing law. It's just something I enjoy doing, right? Sometimes you don't need a bigger reason to do something than just the sheer delight and pleasure of doing it.
Well, there you go, folks. Todd Higey, the man who has done the equivalent of cycling around the world almost 3 times and has gone up and down Mount Everest more times than I can count. All right. That's fantastic. Well, Todd, as we reach the ending here, just a couple last questions. With all this experience and all the things you've been involved in, what would be your advice to somebody starting off in the screening industry or trying to decide whether to stay in it, and not necessarily a person on the management team level, but just the people doing the everyday work that has to get done? Or what would you tell people about the background screening industry, and what would be your advice for dealing with it or getting ahead or staying ahead, whatever?
Yeah. So, Les, I'm going to answer that question. You know how it is for a good lawyer. Always answer the question you want to answer, not the question that was asked. But it's close enough to what you asked. So, and it's because I run into this a lot, and to me, it's really important. A lot of times, people that are just getting into this space, right? So, this may be someone they just decided that they wanted to get into background screening. They want to start a business. Could be someone that is already a business owner, but they want to, they want to lateral into or expand into background screening. A lot of times they'll come to the lawyer, right? Because everyone tells them, you got to have a lawyer. You got to have a lawyer, right? You got to be worried about compliance. And they'll come and they'll chat with me. And my first question is, who's your operations person? Who actually knows how to do this? Because the advice I give or the forms I provide aren't going to do any good if you don't already have someone who knows how this business works, how a background check report is created, cradle to grave. And so what I encourage new business owners coming into this space to do is invest in hiring a veteran in this space. Someone who's been in operations for 10 years at least, has done a Q themselves, so they know how to do the background check report. They know who the vendors are in the space. They know what the standard industry practices are for all the components of it. Invest in hiring that person. Give them an opportunity to come in on the ground floor of the business, right? Maybe give them a little bit of equity, right? To say, hey, you've been in the space for a while. Maybe you started as a Q worker and worked your way up to director of operations. Now here's your chance to join a brand new company. So give them a little bit of equity, but that will reap dividends for the new business owner getting into the space. Because if you've got that operations person, then go get your lawyer, right? And then that lawyer can work with that operations person to set up as bulletproof as you can get, a compliance and risk mitigation structure that will enable that business owner to flourish. That's my 2 cents, my advice.
Oh, that's great advice. And if we had several more hours in the podcast. I'm sure you can give a lot more advice, but Todd, we have come to the end. I really appreciate it. So before we wrap it up and absorb all the great points you made and everything you talked about, is there any closing thoughts or anything else you'd like to add? Because you get the last word. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Les. So my closing thought is to anyone in this industry who's listening to this podcast, please support our government relations efforts. Please support these bills that we get introduced into Congress. They are critical and they are important. And so that is just an important part of our association, and it works for everyone's benefit. So and definitely support the current bill, Mary Louder Milk's FCRA Harmonization Liability Act.
Well, you know, and the butt you save could be your own. So, all right. I mean, if nothing else, just for survival of the industry and your own survival, to have that type of logical, cap, so something doesn't wipe you out. Well, Todd, this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate the chance getting to know you better and hearing all about this, and appreciate your time for being here.
My pleasure, Les.
And ladies and gentlemen, our guest today has been Mr. Todd Higey, lawyer extraordinary, has shared with us some great insights, a great career, and a lot of interesting, fun stuff. Once again, this is Behind the Screens. Les Rosen, your host. Our sponsor is Barry Nixon and the Pre-Employment Directory. And stay tuned for the next episode. Todd, thanks again.
You're welcome.
All right, that was yet another wonderful conversation with a background screening pro. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an update. And hey, if you got a moment, we'd love for you to leave us a review. It really helps get the word out. For more info or to catch up on past episodes, or to make suggestions or to suggest possible future guests, head over to our website. Once again, this is your host, Les Rosen, and it's been a pleasure to bring you another episode. See you on the next episode. Thanks.